The ranger station radio crackled to life with my own voice, asking why I hadn't locked the west gate yet. I was standing 3 feet from the radio when it happened, staring at the dead display that hadn't powered on once during my entire shift. Then it hissed again, and this time the voice laughed under its breath, like it knew I was listening. Night patrol at Black Pine State Park was usually just paperwork, checking trail barriers and running the perimeter roads until sunrise. The station sat 30 miles outside the nearest town in northern Montana, tucked between miles of pine forest and the reservoir that fed the county. Spring had barely turned to summer, and the trees were thick enough now that moonlight barely reached the access roads. We kept one ranger on overnight rotation from May through August, because tourists had a habit of ignoring the closure signs and trying to camp after hours. Most nights, I'd maybe catch a college kid with a cooler or some local teenagers trying to drink by the lake. That night, Channel 3 was dead until 1:17 a.m., when my voice came through asking why I hadn't locked the west gate. I checked the panel. The unit wasn't even switched on. Then the dispatch light blinked red. "Unit 7, the radio said in my voice, clearer now. "You need to lock it before she gets out." I froze long enough to hear static swallow the transmission. Then silence. I grabbed the handheld and called county dispatch. No answer, just static. I tried again on emergency frequency. Nothing. The backup landline had no dial tone. That was wrong enough, but what really made my stomach drop was the gate log hanging beside the desk. Someone had written my initials next to West Access at 12:43 a.m., marking it secured. I hadn't been there yet. My shift started at midnight. I was still working through incident reports at 12:43. I stared at the handwriting. It was mine. Same slant, same way I crossed the T. There was even the small ink blot I always left because I pressed too hard. At first I figured one of the day shift guys was screwing with me. Except nobody stayed after 11, and the station cameras fed directly to the monitor behind my desk. I rewound the footage to 12:43. The station office was empty. The pen lifted by itself, dragged across the page, and wrote my initials while no one stood near it. The radio clicked on again. "She saw you watch that." My voice. Calm, almost amused. Then the transmission cut. I should have driven straight to town. That's what every reasonable part of my brain was screaming. Instead, I grabbed the truck keys and headed for West Access because if someone was out there messing with me, I wanted proof. The gate was 5 miles down the service road through dense timber. My headlights kept catching movement between the trunks, quick pale flashes that disappeared whenever I slowed down. At 1:41, I reached the gate. It was locked. Freshly. My padlock, my chain, and hanging from the center bar was my flashlight. The same dented mag light I'd left charging in the station. It was still warm. I stood there trying to process how it had gotten ahead of me when something moved beyond the gate on the trail. A man in Ranger green stepped into the beam. Same uniform, same build, same face. Mine. He raised one hand slowly, like he was greeting an old friend, then lifted a finger to his lips. Behind him, deeper in the trees, something huge shifted between the branches. Not an animal. Too tall. The duplicate me glanced over his shoulder, and his expression changed from warning to panic. He mouthed one word. "Run." Then the trees behind him exploded forward. I don't mean something came out of them. I mean, the darkness itself folded into a shape and rushed him. The thing was too thin, all angles and jerking limbs, like a person stretched taller than their bones allowed. It hit him, and both vanished into the woods without a sound. I ran for the truck so hard I dropped the keys twice. By the time I got inside, the radio mounted to the dash was already hissing. "It knows which one stayed," my voice again, breathing hard this time, like he was running. I tore back toward the station, gravel spraying behind me. Halfway there, dispatch finally came through. "Unit 7, status check." I nearly shouted into the mic. Told them everything, probably sounding insane. There was a long pause. Then the dispatcher said, "Unit 7 clocked out at 12:51. You acknowledged return to station and signed off." My chest tightened. "I've been on patrol all night." Another pause. "Who is this?" Then the line died. When I got back, the station lights were off. I'd left every room lit. The front door stood open. Inside, the incident board had been updated. Every report from the past 3 months had my name signed at the bottom, all time-stamped during hours I wasn't even scheduled. Missing hikers, strange radio calls, unidentified figure near the reservoir. Each report ended the same way. Subject contained beyond West Gate. At the bottom of the newest sheet, written in fresh ink, were the words, "Containment failed, 1:17 a.m. I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow. Measured. The station only had an attic storage loft above the office, accessible by pull-down ladder. I looked up just as the ladder unfolded on its own. Something began descending. It wore my face, but older somehow. Skin drawn tight, eyes clouded white, mouth fixed in a smile so wide the corners had split. It spoke in my exact voice. "You locked me out 3 summers ago." Then I remembered. My first season here. A missing ranger named Daniel Mercer. Search teams spent weeks looking after he vanished during night patrol. They'd found his truck parked at West Access with the gate hanging open. The final paperwork had been filed under my supervision, because I'd been the one who closed that gate after the search was called off. Except suddenly I remembered something I'd spent 3 years not remembering. There had been another ranger standing beside me that night. He looked exactly like me. He'd begged me not to lock it. Said if I did, he'd be trapped on the wrong side. I'd thought it was exhaustion, heat stroke, some hallucination from working doubles. So I shut the gate. The thing on the ladder smiled wider. It takes your face when you leave someone there. Every radio in the station snapped on at once. Dozens of versions of my voice filled the building, overlapping, panicked, screaming warnings, begging me not to listen, begging me to run, begging me to open the West Gate. The walls shook with it. Then headlights swept across the windows outside. A park service truck pulling in. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out, until I saw who stepped from the cab. Me. Same uniform. Same face. He looked up at the station and yelled, "Don't let him out!" The thing on the ladder lunged. I bolted through the back exit and sprinted for my truck, the station erupting behind me with voices that all sounded like mine. I drove straight for West Access because by then, I understood there was only one chance to end it. Open the gate and let whatever was trapped pass through. But when I reached it, the chain was already hanging loose. The gate stood open to the trees.
and parked beside it was my truck. Engine still warm, keys in the ignition. Mine was still idling beneath me. The radio crackled one last time. My voice, calm and close, whispered from both dashboards at once. "You finally made it back." Then the truck I was sitting in disappeared, and I was standing alone outside the station at 12:43 a.m., signing my initials into the gate log, while footsteps moved slowly in the attic above me.
"Please respond, I'm still up here." The voice came through my headset on Channel 9, a dead frequency the Forestry Service stopped using in 1998 after lightning fried the relay system. I was halfway through my rounds at Alder Ridge Lookout in eastern Oregon, parked beside mile marker 14, with the engine idling and my floodlight pointed into a wall of black pine. It was 2:11 a.m., late June, dead calm, no wind at all. Summer night patrols usually meant checking for illegal campfires and making sure no one had climbed the restricted fire towers after dark. Nothing dramatic. The kind of shift where the loudest thing you heard was your own tires on gravel. Then, the radio hissed again. "Please," the man said, his voice ragged and wet, like he'd been crying for hours. "I can see your truck from here." I killed the engine. Every sound vanished. The nearest tower was 6 miles south, hidden beyond the ridge.
There was no line of sight from where I was parked. "Identify yourself," I said into the mic. Static answered first. Then, "You already know who I am, Eli." My throat tightened. Only one person on the mountain ever called me Eli. My older brother, Mason. He'd vanished from Alder Ridge 7 years earlier during a night fire watch. His tower was found empty at sunrise, trapdoor hanging open, headset still transmitting static. Search teams covered 50 square miles and found nothing except his boots at the base of the tower, neatly side by side, like he'd stepped out of them. I hadn't worked this district until 2 years after he disappeared. Everyone knew the story. No one ever mentioned it to me directly. "That isn't funny," I said, though my voice cracked saying it. The transmission sharpened. I could hear him breathing. "I've been calling every night." "Why did it take you so long to answer?"
Then the signal cut. My dispatch console lit up red. "Incoming distress ping, Tower 12. Tower 12 had been decommissioned after Mason disappeared. No power, no equipment. Half the stairs had collapsed. I stared at the alert until another line appeared beneath it. Operator detected. There should have been no hesitation. Report it. Wait for backup. Follow procedure. Instead, I was already turning the truck around. Tower 12 sat on the highest point of the ridge, reachable by a narrow service road that twisted through old burn scar territory. The forest there had regrown in dense, skeletal clusters after the 2004 wildfire. Driving through it always felt wrong. The trees leaned too close, trunks warped from heat damage into shapes that looked almost human under headlights. Halfway up, I noticed another vehicle ahead.
A Forestry Service pickup parked sideways across the road.
My headlights lit the number stenciled on the bumper. Unit 27. My truck number. I got out slowly. The engine was still ticking with heat. Fresh mud on the tires. My pulse kicked hard enough to blur my vision for a second. There was no one inside, but clipped to the driver's seat was my badge, the one currently pinned to my chest. I reached up instinctively. Empty fabric.
Before I could process that, my radio exploded with feedback. Then my brother's voice screamed through it. "Get off the road!" Something slammed into the side of my truck, hard enough to flip it halfway onto two wheels. I jumped back as it crashed onto its side in a shower of glass. The thing that hit it landed in the dark just beyond my headlights. At first, it looked like a person crawling on all fours.
Then it unfolded. It was too tall by half, its limbs bending in places they shouldn't. Its skin reflected pale and smooth like wet bark. Where its face should have been was a flat blankness, except for a mouth stretched vertically from chin to forehead, opening and closing in dry clicks. It tilted toward me. Then, in Mason's voice, it said, "Wrong one." I ran uphill. The tower was less than a quarter mile ahead. Gravel tore under my boots as branches snapped somewhere behind me, closing fast. The tower stairs loomed above, rusted and swaying. I climbed without looking down. The whole structure groaned beneath my weight. Something hit the lower supports hard enough to shake loose bolts that clanged into the dark below. When I hauled myself into the cab and slammed the hatch shut, I finally looked inside. Someone was already there, sitting in the operator's chair, headset on, staring out the window. Mason. Exactly as he'd looked the summer he vanished. 26. Sunburnt nose. Ranger uniform. The scar over his eyebrow from when we were kids. He didn't turn around. "You shouldn't have come," he said. I couldn't speak. Every rational part of my brain was tearing itself apart, trying to explain what I was seeing. "You're dead." He laughed quietly. I thought so too. Then he pointed toward the forest below. Hundreds of pale figures stood motionless between the trees, all angled toward the tower. Their blank mouths hung open, waiting. Mason finally faced me. His eyes were bloodshot, exhausted. They mimic whoever answers the call. That's how they get replacements. The words landed like ice water. Replacements for what? He looked at the floor hatch. Whoever keeps the line active. He explained in short, clipped bursts. On his final shift 7 years earlier, he'd answered a distress call on Channel 9. Same voice, same plea. When he reached the tower, someone who looked exactly like him was already inside. It told him the relay system beneath the mountain wasn't a relay system at all. It was a containment network, built decades earlier after hikers started vanishing in the burn scar. The towers kept something dormant by transmitting a continuous carrier signal on Channel 9. If the signal stopped, they came up from whatever was under the ridge. Mason had refused to believe it until sunrise, when the thing wearing his face climbed down the stairs and vanished into the trees, leaving him trapped with a radio that could never be switched off. "Why call me?" I asked. His face twisted. "I didn't." That's when the headset on the empty console behind me crackled alive. My own voice filled the room. Because he finally stopped transmitting. Mason's expression changed instantly to horror. I turned. The dead console display glowed bright green. Signal lost. The pale figures below began moving all at once, swarming toward the tower base in complete silence. Mason lunged for the auxiliary transmitter, slamming switches, but nothing happened. "It's already rerouted," he whispered. The voice on the headset laughed. My laugh. "You always answer yourself eventually." Then footsteps clanged on the stairs below. Fast, human-paced, coming up. Mason shoved me toward the hatch on the opposite side of the cab, where the emergency ladder descended the rear support. "Go." "What about you?" He looked suddenly older, like 7 years hit him all at once.
I was the placeholder. Now it's your turn.
The front hatch burst inward. Something climbed through, wearing my face, smiling wider than skin should allow. I dropped onto the rear ladder as the tower shook violently. Above me, I heard screaming, mine, Mason's, dozens layered together until they became one impossible sound. I hit the ground and ran blind into the forest. Behind me, the tower lights flared white, then blacked out completely. I didn't stop until sunrise. Search crews found me wandering Highway 18, barefoot and incoherent. They searched Tower 12. Nothing. No signs of collapse, no transmitter. No evidence anyone had been there for years. They told me exhaustion and grief can trigger vivid dissociation, especially with family trauma attached to a place. I almost believed them.
Until last week, when dispatch reassigned me to nights at Alder Ridge. My first shift back, the radio was silent until exactly 2:11 a.m. Then Channel 9 opened on its own, and through the static, I heard my own voice, exhausted and cracking with panic, whisper, "Please respond. I'm still up here." The logbook was signed with my name 3 hours before I arrived, and the handwriting matched down to the crooked tail on my last initial. I stood in the doorway of the Ranger outpost, staring at it while rain hammered the tin roof hard enough to rattle the windows. Cabin 6 sat deep in the Bitterroot National Forest in western Montana, 20 miles from the nearest paved road, used only during summer for overnight patrol rotations. 1 ranger, 1 radio tower, 1 service truck. My shift had started at 11 p.m. According to the entry staring back at me in fresh black ink, I'd checked in at 8:04. Notes included weather conditions, perimeter status, and a complaint about the generator sputtering under load. Exactly the kind of thing I would write. Same clipped phrasing. Same habit of underlining anything mechanical. I ran my thumb over the page, expecting smeared ink. Dry. The storm had delayed me nearly 2 hours. Fallen branches blocked the service road, and I'd had to clear enough by hand to squeeze the truck through. There was no way anyone could have reached the station ahead of me, unless they'd already been here. I checked the cabin. Empty. Bed made. Kitchen untouched. Mudroom dry, except for my own wet boot prints. Then the radio mounted over the desk crackled. "You made it." My own voice. Low and flat. Not static distorted enough to explain away. I looked at the transmitter panel. Power switch off. The red receive light blinked anyway. "Took longer than expected," the voice added. Then silence. Cabin 6 had no cellular coverage, and the landline had been dead since spring runoff washed out half the buried cable. Radio was the only contact point to district dispatch. I flipped the main switch on. Nothing. Dead board, but the receive light kept blinking like something was still listening. I called dispatch from the handheld. No response, just the soft hiss of open air. I told myself there had to be some crossed relay signal bouncing from another tower. But then I noticed the security monitor. 4 camera feeds covered the perimeter: gate, fuel shed, generator pad, and the fire road leading down the ridge. On screen 3, under the yellow floodlight by the generator, a man in rain gear stood facing the camera. Motionless. Same height as me. Same broad shoulders. Hood pulled low enough to hide his face. As I watched, he slowly raised one hand and tapped the lens from the outside. The feed died. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The rain hit cold and hard enough to sting. Generator pad was 20 yards across open gravel. Empty.
No footprints except mine filling with water. The floodlight above the shed buzzed once and blew out. The radio inside the cabin crackled again, loud enough to hear through the storm. Wrong direction. I ran back inside. The fourth monitor feed, the fire road camera, showed someone standing at the tree line now. No hood, no rain jacket. Just me, perfectly visible under the wash of lightning, staring directly into the lens with a smile I've never made in my life. Too wide, too deliberate. Then the feed cut to static. I locked the cabin door. Pointless, probably, but automatic. The storm worsened fast. Wind shoved at the walls hard enough to make the whole structure groan. Somewhere outside, metal clanged rhythmically. The gate chain, maybe. Or the fuel shed latch. Then 3 knocks sounded against the front door. Slow, evenly spaced. "Open up," my voice called from outside. "You're getting water everywhere." I backed away from the door so fast I hit the desk. Another 3 knocks. "Dispatch sent me to relieve you." Silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then the voice changed. Same pitch, same cadence, but urgent now. "Don't answer if it sounds like me." It came from the radio. The door handle twisted hard enough to rattle the frame. "It learns by hearing." The voice on the radio was definitely mine, but strained and breathless, like I was running while speaking. "Shut off every speaker." I yanked the cabin breaker panel open and killed everything except the emergency battery line. Lights out. Monitors dead. Radio dark. The knocking stopped immediately. For a few seconds, there was only rain and my own breathing. Then a new sound started above me. Footsteps in the attic crawl space. Cabin 6 didn't have an attic. Just 6 inches of insulation between the ceiling and roof. The steps moved slowly from one end of the cabin to the other. Deliberate. Heavy enough to make dust drift through the light of my flashlight. They stopped directly overhead. Then my own voice whispered through the ceiling boards. "Found you." Something slammed down onto the roof. The whole structure shook. Another impact, then another. Like someone dropping full body weight from above trying to break through. I grabbed the truck keys and bolted for the rear exit. The moment I opened it, lightning lit the clearing. Someone was standing under the back awning. Me. Close enough to touch. His face looked almost right until he smiled and his jaw unhinged downward far past human anatomy, stretching skin until it split at both cheeks. I slammed the door and stumbled back. The front door burst inward at the same instant. Rain exploded through the opening. Another version of me stood there, dripping wet, holding the station logbook. "You signed in," he said. "That means you stay." I ran for the trapdoor beneath the supply table that led to the storm crawlspace under the cabin. I barely got it shut before something crashed across the floor above. Through the slats, I saw boots moving. 2 sets, then 3, all identical. Their voices overlapped, all mine, discussing where I might hide, like coworkers planning inventory. He always chooses the crawl space. He remembers more each cycle. That's new. One crouched above the hatch. His face appeared between the boards upside down, eyes pale and reflective like an animal's. "You left us here first." Then memory hit so hard it made me gag. Summer before last. Same station. Same storm. I'd heard knocking at the door around midnight.
opened it to find a ranger from another district, soaked through and frantic, begging to use the radio. Said his patrol partner was trapped near Raven Creek. I let him in. He looked exactly like me. I remembered laughing from sheer confusion before everything after that dissolved into blankness. The district later told me I'd completed the shift normally and filed routine reports. I'd never questioned the missing 12 hours. Above me, the voices stopped. Then the real radio crackled to life somewhere in the cabin. "Listen carefully," my voice said, weak and distorted. "They can't cross the creek." That voice was different, older, exhausted in a way that felt real.
You have 3 minutes before they force the handoff.
The crawlspace had a drainage tunnel leading downhill to Raven Creek, maybe 40 yards of muddy pipe, barely wide enough to squeeze through. I didn't think, I crawled. Behind me, the hatch ripped open. Voices screamed my name. The pipe flooded halfway with runoff, freezing and thick with mud, but I kept moving until moonlight appeared ahead. I spilled out into the creek bed, gasping. Cabin 6 stood uphill through the trees, every window blazing with light. Figures that looked like me lined the porch, watching silently. None stepped into the water. One raised a hand and waved. I made it to the highway by dawn. District search teams found Cabin 6 abandoned. No power, no records, no logbook. According to official files, Cabin 6 burned down in a lightning strike 9 years ago and was never rebuilt.
They showed me photographs of the foundation, just blackened concrete and weeds.
I quit forestry that same week, moved to Idaho. Took a warehouse job, tried not to think about any of it. That lasted 11 months. Then yesterday, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was the Cabin 6 logbook, opened to the latest entry. Signed with my name. Time-stamped tonight, 8:04 p.m. Under remarks, in my handwriting it says, "Delay expected. Road conditions may slow his arrival."
The monitor above the break room microwave showed me walking back into Shaft 3 at 3:26 a.m., 40 minutes after I'd clocked out and driven halfway down the mountain. I nearly ran my truck off the service road when the company dispatcher called and asked why I'd returned underground without logging re-entry. Copper Ridge was a small extraction site in northern Arizona, tucked into the mountains outside Jerome, active only on overnight maintenance during summer because daytime heat made the lower shafts unbearable. My job was simple: inspect ventilation systems, reset pressure valves, and clear methane alarms if they tripped falsely. Graveyard shift paid better because nobody wanted 12 hours alone inside a mountain. By 2:45 that morning, I'd finished the checklist, signed off with surface control, and driven out through the south gate. I was 10 miles downhill when dispatch called. "Why'd you go back in?" the supervisor asked. What are you talking about?
He sounded annoyed, like I was wasting his time. "You badged into Shaft 3 at 3:26. Camera has you clear as day." I checked the dashboard clock. 3:31. I was still on the switchback road with the valley lights miles below. There was no possible way. I turned around immediately. The mine's surface lot was empty when I arrived, except for my own truck parked beside the security office. Same dent in the rear bumper. Same cracked taillight. My actual truck was still idling beneath me. I shut it off and just stared, keys frozen in my hand. The dispatcher, Rick, was waiting inside. He looked pale enough to be sick. Without a word, he rewound the footage. There I was, stepping from my truck at exactly 3:24, swiping my badge at the gate, then walking straight toward Shaft 3 carrying my toolbox. Same work shirt, same reflective vest.
Same slight limp from an old high school football injury.
Before disappearing into the elevator cage, the other me paused and looked directly into the camera. Then he smiled. "That's not possible," I said. Rick just nodded toward the badge access screen. 2 entries, same ID number. One recorded when I'd left at 2:47, one when I'd returned. You need to go down there and figure out what the hell this is before corporate sees it. Every instinct said no. But if this was some elaborate prank or data glitch tied to my credentials, refusing would look worse. So I geared back up, grabbed a fresh radio, and took the service cage down alone. Shaft 3 dropped nearly 2,000 feet into the oldest section of the mine, where abandoned tunnels honeycombed through the rock beyond active extraction zones. Most had been sealed after a collapse in 1996 killed 6 workers. The cage groaned all the way down.
At level C, the doors opened onto empty concrete and fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. My radio cracked instantly. "You made good time." My own voice. Calm. Close enough to sound like someone standing just behind me. I spun around. Empty platform. "Who is this?" Static. Then, check the maintenance board. The whiteboard beside the tool lockers listed active work orders. 3 tasks were marked complete in fresh blue marker, signed with my initials. One of them was valve reset at Junction 14. I hadn't been there tonight. Junction 14 sat deep in the abandoned section, beyond the sealed collapse barriers. The timestamp beside the signature read 3:29 a.m. 3 minutes in the future. My radio hissed again. "Hurry!" I should have gone straight back to the cage. Instead, I headed for Junction 14 because the handwriting was mine, and because somewhere under the panic was the sick certainty that if I didn't follow this, something worse was waiting. The barrier gate to the abandoned section stood open. Heavy steel chain cut clean through and hanging loose. Beyond it, the tunnel lights were on. They shouldn't have had power. I followed the tracks deeper, boots crunching over years of settled dust, until I noticed a second set of prints ahead of mine. Fresh, identical tread pattern. Same size, matching every slight outward angle of my right foot. They stopped abruptly at the wall outside Junction 14. No turn, no retreat. Just ended at solid rock. The valve room door creaked open by itself. Inside, every monitor was active. Security feeds from across the mine flickered in black and white. Each showed me. In one, I was riding the surface elevator down. In another, crossing the break room.
In another, standing exactly where I was now, staring back through the monitor. The version of me on screen raised a hand and tapped the glass from his side. Every feed cut to static. Then the room lights died. Emergency red strips flickered on. My radio screamed with overlapping transmissions, all my voice, dozens of them talking at once. "Left too early. Doesn't remember the handoff. Keep him below." One voice finally rose above the rest. "Don't let it close the cage." Then something slammed somewhere down the tunnel, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Footsteps followed. Fast. Running toward me. I bolted. The emergency lights strobed every few seconds, turning the tunnel into jump-cut flashes of motion. Each pulse showed someone closer behind me. My face. My body. Sprinting full speed.
Smiling. I hit the elevator platform and hammered the call button. Nothing. The cage indicator showed it descending on its own from surface level. As it dropped, I could hear movement inside. Scratching. Dozens of hands against metal. The doors opened. The cage was full of men wearing my face, packed shoulder to shoulder, all grinning with mouths too wide to close. They didn't step out. They just watched. One near the center spoke in my voice. "You're late. They already reassigned your shift." The lights cut completely. Hands grabbed for me through the dark. I ran blind into the nearest side tunnel, hearing them spill from the cage behind me. The tunnel dead-ended at an old blast chamber sealed with concrete. Except there was a narrow crack running through it now, just wide enough to see through. Light flickered on the other side. I looked in. It wasn't another tunnel. It was the surface security office. Rick sat at the monitor, drinking coffee, watching footage of me entering the mine. Behind him stood another Rick, motionless, staring at the back of his own head. Then the second Rick slowly looked toward the crack and smiled directly at me. Memory hit like a physical blow. 2 summers earlier, my first month at Copper Ridge, methane alarms had trapped me underground for almost an hour when the service cage jammed. I remembered hearing someone on the other side of the sealed blast wall calling my name, sounding exactly like me. I'd answered. That was all. I finally understood. This wasn't duplication. It was replacement. Every time someone answered their own voice underground, another version crossed through. The thing wearing Rick's face stepped closer to the crack. "You let yourself in back then," it said. "We've just been waiting for your shift to end." Footsteps echoed behind me, all of them approaching. No way back, no room to run. The wall beside the crack suddenly split wider with a grinding snap, opening just enough to squeeze through. Surface light poured in. My only chance. I forced myself through, tearing skin off both arms on jagged stone, and fell into the security office. Rick jerked up from the monitor. Alone now. No second figure. No sign of anything wrong except the feed on screen. It showed me still standing underground in the blast chamber, staring directly into the camera. "How did you get up here?" Rick asked. I looked at the surface clock. 2:46 a.m. 40 minutes earlier than when this started. Before I could answer, the man on the monitor smiled and stepped away from the camera toward the elevator. Rick frowned. "You heading back down?" Then his eyes shifted to me standing in front of him. His face went blank. Slowly, he looked from the screen to my face and back again. The radio on his desk crackled with my voice, clear and cheerful. "Surface Control, this is Nate. Maintenance complete. I'm coming up." The elevator arrival bell rang, and Rick reached for the phone without taking his eyes off me.